Today I want to talk about the Paper Mario series at large and my thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of each game. Though, since Origami King just came out recently, I want to focus mainly on that still. But for the entire perspective, I do want to talk about the series at large. We'll just have a little bit of a focus on the recent games. But anyway, this series is a pretty controversial topic these days, and the series many years ago was probably my favorite of all time. And there was a point in time where I regarded it as a series that was up there in quality with Zelda, Smash, main series Mario as well. I thought it was better than main series Mario personally, but maybe I'm part of the minority on this, but that's how it was back then. So it was a big deal to me when a new Paper Mario game was coming out, and unfortunately this changed. So we live in a time period now where there are two groups of fans of Paper Mario who are on completely different wavelengths. There are the traditional Paper Mario fans like myself, who prefer the first three games in the series and think that they're the much better games. Then there are a different group of fans, and I don't want to call them newer fans because I'd be assuming that all the people who prefer the newer trilogy are new to the series, but it does feel that way a bit. But there's two groups of fans, and what I've noticed is with this second group of fans, especially very recently, mainly whenever a new game comes out, this new group of fans has a very hostile attitude towards the Thousand Year Door. Now, this hostility may be because of fans of the originals, and thus, I guess, TTYD, and these older fans have been incredibly vocal about the newer games. As someone who sees himself as part of this crowd, I want to first say off that there's a lot of good with the last two Paper Marios, and I see a lot of similarities between the current state of Paper Mario, kind of with Pokemon. And obviously they're very different games, but they're both series that have seen a lot of fan criticism recently. However, I think there's an important distinction to make with them. So Pokemon, since the 3DS for the most part, has kind of had an issue where it's felt a little bit stale, and it's suffered from a lack of personality or charm. And people say it's the same game every time, and people haven't really had much of a large outcry though on this series, outside of the National Dex. And that's mainly because the formula hasn't been touched. The series still sells really quickly, and as a result, I don't really feel like many of the problems with the series will be fixed because of it. On the other hand, Paper Mario bailed on a working formula, which in a sense is almost the opposite of what the Pokemon series is dealing with. And the series got an incredible backlash for doing this because I think a lot of people are like, oh, it changed, so we have to talk about this change, and a lot of times people will assume it's bad. And many, people tend to say that Pokemon is stale, however, Paper Mario is ruined, and I could not disagree more with this. And, despite being a Paper Mario traditionalist, I think modern Paper Mario has a lot more promise than the future of the Pokemon series. And despite it changing so much, the one thing I can say about Paper Mario is that it still has originality going for it. Color Splash and the Origami King have presented so many worthwhile ideas to the series and so much entertaining dialogue, and the issues that the series currently has, in my opinion, lies mainly in some of the game design. These problems are frustrating because these problems are easily fixable, but the good news is that it is fixable, and this is what gives me hope in the Paper Mario series, though it also sometimes fills me with dread that it seems that there's very easy solutions that are just not being taken. With the Pokemon series, I doubt I'll ever love it again, because it doesn't feel like each new entry is giving me a reason to want to experience it. The reason I still love Paper Mario is because the new games constantly have provided entertaining new experiences that feel worth my time, and once again, the Origami King is a step closer in the right direction. Now here's the very important thing I want to tell fans of modern Paper Mario. As someone whose favorite game of all time is the Thousand Year Door, when I say things are fixable with the new games, I don't mean turning every game in the series into the Thousand Year Door 2.0. And that's not really something I want. Now, nothing would make me happier than to have a new traditional Paper Mario game, but the point I want to make is I'm more than okay with flexibility as long as the new things are done well. And ultimately, I want a game to be better than the Thousand Year Door, because that's a victory for everybody. I just don't think we've reached that point yet, but I want to talk about the ways I think the series could get there and maybe surpass it in the future. One very important thing to not confuse is criticism versus hatred. There's a lot of issues I have with Origami King, and that doesn't make me hate the game. And when I'm not attacking the game as a final product when I say something like the battle system isn't good. If I say the game is worse than this other game, then yeah, I'm making a claim about the game at large. But if I give a valid criticism about the game for something, it's because I believe it could have been better in that area. Origami King was a game that flirted a lot with greatness, but some of its own ideas held it back, in my opinion. It may be unfair for someone who loves the original Paper Mario games so much to give a fair review of the last two games, I guess. But it's mainly because I think the last two games are really nice, but deep down they'll forever be games I can't help but feel could have been some of my favorites ever, but weren't. And with this all being said, I want to finally talk about Origami King just as a game, not the 6th Paper Mario game. Now, it's possible I've made some of the newer fans angry already, but as an act to show that I'm really trying to be unbiased, to start my thoughts on Origami King, I want to talk about two major aspects of the new games that are actually better than the Thousand Year Door before diving into the details. The first is that both Color Splash and Origami King have much better overworld gameplay when it comes to navigating the field. The colorless spots in Color Splash were actually a really nice distraction, and side activity throughout the game incentivize you to explore the whole map. And with the inclusion of these, making levels, with all the new features, it makes the levels feel less side-scrolly, and it becomes more important than ever before to have a map that has interesting secrets everywhere and kind of twists and turns and has places that you may not notice at first. And Origami King understood clearly that this was a strength of Color Splash, which is why they brought back the colorless spots in the form of not bottomless holes. Now, the name may need some work, but from a gameplay perspective, these are great. It does feel like a pretty unnatural replacement, but at the end of the day, it took one of the best aspects from Color Splash and ran with it further. The new completion menus also really complemented this idea very well, and the series has never felt so possible and fulfilling to complete at a 100% level. And Origami King also expanded greatly upon what we can expect out of some of the level design in this game. And right from Chapter 1, you can notice much more usage of the Z-axis, as levels now can involve climbing up and down hills or towers with much more frequency than the older games. And those older games kind of preferred having us move from left to right. And there's some exceptions there, but for the most part, the twists and turns are much more, common in Origami King. And I think this makes for better exploration in general, as it gives more spots to hide things, and it's a satisfying change of pace from the battles. The Origami King also adds chests of collectibles for completionists, and these are often hidden in clever places, so to top it all off, much like Color Splash and even Paper Jam also, there's searching for toads to save, and that's another thing that you constantly have to do throughout the game. Unlike Color Splash, where you find them with the paint sucked out of them, here you'll find them in all kinds of shapes and forms. Some toads will be a dog or a spider, and you'll smash it with your hammer, and boom, it's a toad that you just saved. And I thought this was stupid at first until it actually hit me that these toads are being saved because they were turned into origami objects against their will. And I guess it's a minor detail, but it's one that feels clever. Add in more fast travel and shortcuts throughout levels, and the Origami King is a game that abandons the world map to feel like a believable world without much backtracking overall. And it definitely exists in the game at times, and about as much as you'd encounter in any Paper Mario. Notably the 3rd chapter, but it never feels like a hindrance, especially in the way I guess the beginning of the 7th chapter in TTYD starts off, where it actually is a hindrance. And since the world map doesn't exist anymore, there's one thing that I think the game would have benefit from bringing back that I'm kind of surprised wasn't in it, and that would be the return pipe from Super Paper Mario, which could instantly bring you back to Toad Town in this game. It's not a giant deal, but it would have saved some minutes for sure. But anyways, if you were to pick up Origami King fresh as a new player, I would recommend trying to play the game to completion during your playthrough. To be clear, I'm not asking you to commit to doing 100%, but I'd recommend trying to do as much as possible instead of just trying to get from point A to point B. While battles have been a big problem for the lack of experience points, it's worth noting that the coins and confetti you get from them will greatly help you in your goal to fill all the holes in the world, and to buy everything you come across, including the more pricey things. And these details alone can at least incentivize battling a little bit, so if you're just planning to rush through the game to form your opinion, you're probably not going to like the game as much and probably give it an unfair review. The second thing these two recent games have had that are an improvement over the older games is that I think the writing is consistently sharp and really never slows down. And the original trilogy definitely had its moments, but these games will have you grinning constantly, and while I would sometimes not talk to NPCs in the Thousand Year Door if they didn't look interesting, I find myself talking to every single one in these recent games because a lot of them have some well thought out one-liners. Even in this one scene in Color Splash, you'll have like 50 toads that all look identical lined up to enter a building when it opens, and before it opens, you can talk to every single one of them and they'll tend to have something stupid to say, and they're all like really different than the others, so it's not something that had to be done, but it's something that they did do, and it's little things like this that make me appreciate the games more and stuff. So I'm eventually going to stop tying Color Splash and Origami King together, but as a last comment, Nintendo did these games no favors whatsoever leading up to the release. And after Sticker Star, everybody was ready to scrutinize a new Paper Mario game if it looked bad. Color Splash's opening trailer was absolutely awful, and showcased almost none of the positives the game had to offer. And all it did was shove a bunch of toads in our faces, confirm that the game was looking like Sticker Star 2.0 with the world map, and it showed off some of the rather uninteresting areas compared to stuff later in the game. What they could have done was show off some of the more interesting early game levels like the Golden Coliseum or the Dark Blue End, and maybe even showcase some of the more interesting dialogue, considering they seem to axe the idea of dialogue altogether in Sticker Star. It'd still be a negative reaction, but there'd at least be some things that people would be interested in. With Origami King, the trailers were better, but the treehouse leading up to the game was horrendous. And this is because the worst part of the game, in my opinion, and by a large margin, was the first chapter, or the first 3 to 5 hours of the game. And I'm looking back at my notes from playing Chapter 1, and they were like really negative compared to the latter chapters. And everything was really slow. Walking from Whispering Woods to Toad Town is slow, the plot setup is slow. The game forces a mandatory battle tutorial on you, and this isn't the worst thing ever, but it will be a slight annoyance to anyone wanting to do a replay if they don't have the option to skip it. But then it's worth noting that 20 minutes later they give you the exact same tutorial on how to battle again, something that is annoying even for a first time playthrough. So I thought the battle system was literally worse than Color Splashes for a minute as well, but luckily I don't think this was the case, though I'll save some actual criticisms for later, I guess. And if you're interested in playing the game, just please know, don't give up on Picnic Road, because the whole segment is just kind of awful. And the overworld looks nice and stuff, but it feels like a basic Mario level, and the battles are just dreadful this early in the game. With so few enemies on the map early on, the solutions are literally free. Like, the game literally shows you how you're supposed to line them up by default before it scrambles them. And though I didn't notice this as the game progressed, but I didn't notice that as like the game progressed pretty much. And it felt like in Chapter 1 the solutions were constantly thrown like in front of your face, and you get a power bonus when you correctly line up your enemies and solve puzzles, but in the early chapters your default attacks are so powerful compared to like the weak enemies that you kill them all without the power bonus anyway. So it feels like the power bonus is useless for the first few hours, but it actually does matter is the thing, just later on. You get coins so easily in this chapter as well, without much to spend it on. I guess that's an easy criticism, but I don't think it's much of a big deal after playing the whole game. And the amount of enemies on the map affect how many attacks you have in your turn, so technically it's always possible to win regular battles in one turn if you have the right things equipped, but as a result, calling it purely turn-based feels a little disingenuous, but mainly in Chapter 1. The reason why it doesn't feel turn-based is because if you're able to comprehend the rather simple battle system early on, you're never going to experience an enemy turn. And multiple hours into the game, it felt like I'd never even experienced enemy attacks, and it felt like a joke as a result. And add in the fact that you get no experience for these RPG-styled battles, and I genuinely was wondering what I was even playing for. But the damage did eventually ramp up near the end of the chapter, and when you fail to finish everything off in Chapter 1, you'd also get a power boost when there was 3 enemies or so, and the game would urge you to finish them off, and this is another thing that I just felt was dumb because it felt like I had not done anything, but the reality is that this was just consistent because they would have been free to line up anyway, so the power boost is warranted. So, pretty much, In Chapter 1, the battle system feels a little bit more brain dead than I want to say it actually is, though I can't lie, it's not really anything that deep. Items now return from Super Paper Mario, which sounds weird, but in reality everything in the last 2 games were cards. So, as a result, you can actually use them out of battle, which sounds stupid because this is like pretty textbook game design. You can use items to heal out of battle, but it's kind of nice considering that we didn't have this privilege in the last 2 games. Really, the only thing about items is that it's kind of a bummer that when you go to shop for them, like purchases are really slow, especially compared to like Prismic Hardware or the shops in Sticker Star, so that's kind of a disappointment. But there's some other places where I guess the battle system falls a bit flat, and the biggest disappointment in this regard comes from the form of action commands. Now, these have always been critical in every Mario RPG game as a means to do more damage with attacks. And to start battles in many RPGs, you run into enemies, but in Mario RPGs, you go for a first strike. And the first strike has always been a notable way to get an immediate advantage in these normal fights, but it feels completely useless in this game, and most of the time it makes so little difference that it feels worthless to have in a game and just even a waste of time at that. Because battles tend to have 8 or 12 enemies, having a weak hit on just one enemy changes nothing. But what's more egregious is how little action commands matter. In general, the standard jump in this game is comparable to the multi-bounce badge in the early games and how it functions. But unlike the multi-bounce, if you miss your command, you not only still do most of the damage that you would normally get anyway, but you still get to continue the jumps like you didn't miss. And what this means is that there's barely any penalty to choking a jump at any point ever. In the originals, you would have lots of different commands to learn, some being more challenging than others. Some were natural abilities like the spin jump, some were new partner abilities, special moves, special badge moves, and to top it all off, the Thousand Year Door added stylish moves to expand on this idea further. And Origami King, this is pretty much reduced to the boots and hammer attacks with very little variation otherwise outside of the fire and ice fall or maybe the POW block. I don't really know, I didn't use it that much. And what this pretty much means is that all depth to the battle system has come down to spinning the stage and blocking enemy attacks. The stage is easy early on, but to its credit, it gets tougher. And there were times where I wouldn't be able to assort it all in time. And if you feel like you're lacking in time, you can use coins to add time. I would do this sometimes, though it felt like it decreased a lot of the challenge of the game, honestly. But sometimes I would do it anyway because I wanted to get the satisfaction of figuring out like how to solve the puzzle to begin with. So, though this battle system is something at least, unlike Color Splash and Sticker Star, it still doesn't feel great in my opinion. Spinner solutions can be studied at the Ringer in Toad Town, and as a result I almost recommend not practicing until post-game to give yourself more of a challenge during the regular game, because honestly, the entire challenge with the fights is just getting the ring correctly. This is a minor gripe, but ring control can be kind of weird at times, and when you're spinning you can only go from the inside out, at least from what I could tell. And I wish there was a toggle that would reverse this. Maybe there is and I'm being stupid, but this is how I remembered it and I never got to do that. But additionally, in some of the boss fights, a minor issue for me is if you would spin like one of the circles, spin another, then decide to change the original circle, it counts this as 3 moves instead of 2. And sometimes I'd lose track of thought and accidentally do this. And it was my fault, I get it. It was just really tilting because it's not doing an additional move, it's just editing a prior move. And it's not like you'll ever need more than one move to control a single ring, so if you touch the same ring once, or touch the same ring twice, it's pretty much the same thing as touching it once, you just spun it additionally. So, one more minor complaint is, I've noticed some ring lineups are deemed to be perfect lineups as opposed to great lineups. And if anyone can explain, please tell me the difference, because I can't figure it out, because it feels like all my great rotations do the job perfectly. Again, it's a minor complaint, but it was something I felt the need to bring up. The game clearly did try to give a nod to fans of the original in some ways. One way was through adding partners back, though they are a bit different this time. And additionally, the crowd has an audience again, which is a clear nod to the Thousand Year Door. This also plays out differently like partners, though. The crowd consists entirely of toads, and more of them appear the more you save in the overworld, which makes sense, and in theory, it should incentivize exploration to give yourself an advantage in battles. Now, this is something I would say only in theory, though, because I think the audience kind of sucks, honestly, unfortunately. Like the timer, you can pay money for toads to cheer you on. The toads will help you solve puzzles, heal you, etc., and to be honest, what I saw seemed so incredibly brain dead that I didn't want to use this feature at all. Toads just literally win battles for you without doing anything. I felt that legitimately takes away from the experience. And there's a puzzle solver on top of all of this that you can and like at that point it just feels like overkill. I mean, the thing is, it's like at that point you might as well just not battle if you're going to pay so much money to have the toads solve the puzzle for you, because you don't even get that many coins back. But anyways, I understand it's for the casual group of players, but I'll have a discussion regarding the casual players more later, because I kind of have the opinion that the newer games aren't doing the best job possible at appealing to casuals that they claim they do. But I'll get more into this after I finish the Origami King review. I guess it's nice to have an addition of an audience like TTYD. I just didn't feel like its incorporation outside of seeing what they'd say in the background was really that good. One of the quotes that like cracked me up early on was like one of the toads is just like, "Yo, what happened? My eyes were closed." And it kind of loses its luster after a while, but I don't know, sometimes they'll say something that's like, haha. But anyways, I'll talk more about Partners in Death later, because there's more stuff to talk about that's worth it for them. But since I'm talking about the battle system right now, unfortunately I have to confirm that I don't like them in battles at all. And yeah, they're useful at times, but it's upsetting to me that they're like how they're used, because they're literally just AI that work on your side. I would have liked to control them like in the old days, because it feels more like a video game in that sense and not just a cinematic. Because between these underwhelming partners, audience, and RPG battle system, it feels like they're trying to score some kind of points with Paper Mario traditionalists, and for me, the response feels like it's a half-baked effort, and you might as well just finish the job. A unique new touch for the battle system was how they used the unique stickers in this game, and that includes the Iron Jump and Hurl Hammer, because they were used in better ways in this game compared to the last two. Now, they're still consumables, which makes it better to use normal jumps and hammers when possible, but they're consumable in the same way that weapons are consumable in Breath of the Wild. You get sufficient use out of them. By mid-game, however, you start to lose motives to ever use normal attacks to begin with, because the enemies become more powerful and the game throws so many of these special attacks at you, just really anywhere. So on top of that, they're very cheap in shops as well, so there's not a lot of strategy on choosing what to use to barely finish off enemies, when there could have been. The best strategy is simply to just mash powerful attacks that you get, even if they're consumable, because there's an excess of them. So it felt like there should have just been a lot more variety with these types of special attacks in general, but in reality you're just going to be using whatever flashy jump, flashy hammer stuff that you get, and they're almost as common as your normal items at some point. And honestly, it's like the Hurl Hammer is just a way of attacking a line with a hammer, just like a jump, and the Iron Jump is just a way to attack people that are in a line, but like with a hammer-like thing, or something that can hit them, because obviously you can't jump on spikes or something. I feel like they definitely could have done more with some of the other attack cards or stickers, but honestly, these things were it'd just be better if they were replaced by a badge system. I couldn't help but feel. Now, your alternate attacks and hammers can also be equipped mid-battle, so it feels like there's not really much of a purpose to strategize when it comes down to your normal attack rotation, like what to choose ahead of time. I feel like at the very least, switching out your attack inventory should have taken a turn in order to incentivize bringing what you need. Unlike badges though, you can't really bypass the in-battle equipping though, because in certain fights, you'll need to have an Iron Jump to win, so you need to have the option to get to it if you don't have it equipped already. You can make the argument that the game still offers badges in the form of accessories. These accessories will sometimes buff you, and like Pokemon, like they'll display the abilities on screen as they appear. The game flaunts it, and the game flaunts your buffs to start many battles. The thing is that while accessories aren't a bad thing, they aren't really that creative like the old badge system was. Now, the badge system often would change how you would play the game entirely, and that alone created a ton of replayability in the process. There's not actually choice with the accessories, you're just stupid not to equip them, honestly. Like, you just equip the best version of each type, and it's done. There's an optimal version of each type, other than the miscellaneous ones that don't really buff you to begin with, and it doesn't really require thought at all. Sure, it's nice to have, but it's just buffs that the game gives you without really you doing much. The cool thing about the badge system in older games was simply that different combinations could yield interesting results. You can make your own unique builds. Oftentimes, pairing certain badge combinations together would create an effect that was greater than the sum of the parts, and some badge setups would give you ridiculous attack power, while some are the opposite and are more defensive. Sometimes you could let your partners get buffed a ton compared to yourself, and though the game has no hard mode, the double pain badge exists to grant that challenge for a 0 BP cost. Now, Origami King can still be a completely enjoyable experience obviously, but I do think the game would be better off and more replayable if it had more customizable options for the gameplay. Going back to the topic of the attack items, the battle menu UI honestly gets a little bit messy with all the jump and hammer options you have, and every time you want to use a hammer attack, which is pretty frequently, you have to scroll down past all the jump consumables you have equipped. It's not like this is a big deal, but rotating options like the originals where you select a jump menu or a hammer menu probably would have been the play. Like implied with the iron boots being necessary in certain scenarios earlier, I can confirm that Origami King finally recognizes that coming into a fight with no chance to win is BS, and this is part of the reason why there is a mid-battle equip option, I think. This is something that plagued Sticker Star and Color Splash, and for this reason alone, the boss battles gain so much more potential than the two games before it, and in some areas, they're better than the originals. Now, I personally prefer the original boss battles because it felt like a good test of game mechanics. You trust your timing and your builds. In this game, boss battles are completely separate to anything else in the game and how they operate, so it's pretty much a minigame in that regard. That being said, it still works incredibly well for what it is, and is easily the best use of the battle ring in the game, the bosses. To start off, they're better than the last two games by default because these battles give you absolutely everything you need to defeat each boss the first time. If you die, it's actually on you. And in the last two games, there's gigantic issues because sometimes it wasn't a matter of the boss being hard, it was just a matter of you not bringing the right thing. And unlike Super Paper Mario, fights last for more than 10 seconds, so yeah, it's definitely a top, like the boss battles are definitely top half of in the Paper Mario series, for sure. I would say it's closer to first place than it is to fourth place, for sure. Bosses are pretty much a bunch of gimmicks, but I say this in the best possible way. The way to beat every boss outside of the first one is pretty much all about spamming the use of magic circles. This sounds extremely linear in how you beat them, but the good news is that the bosses are cleverly made to make this objective somewhat difficult at times. And without spoiling anything, I'll just say that every boss turns the ring into a labyrinth. You have to configure all the rings to give yourself as many buffs as possible before ultimately landing on a useful spot, but the bosses will make this task more difficult than it initially appears to be by using their logical abilities to create some board limitations. And some of these ideas are really clever and really showed me that the devs were willing to think outside the box on some of these. And though the bosses felt like their own weird thing, they were a cool weird, and I thought it was pretty nice to experience. They're very arguably the best bosses in the series to date, I think. So it's not really a surprise because of the trailers, but many of the bosses are office supplies. You know, office supplies that talk. And it's kind of a ridiculous concept, and I feel like they're just shoving the whole thing sticker idea down our throat, this time through the bosses though. But it feels more reasonable this time because they aren't sacrificing quality of gameplay. I think the whole haha it's paper mentality of the series is a really cringe thing to prioritize, and honestly it's incredible to come out of this game saying that the bosses with the most interesting personalities in the entire game are a bunch of inanimate objects. The intro to one of the fights is absolutely ridiculous, another one of these supplies is just an Italian stereotype in every way possible, and if I could choose, I would really wish they would not go this route again and just go the route of the first three games with their bosses. It's okay to have interesting new characters as bosses. Not everything has to have a theme behind it. It doesn't have to be the Kooplings in this game, office supplies in the next game. It could just be a dragon, then the main villains, right-hand man, etc. Not all the bosses have to be related, and I think it's better this way because often it makes the chapters feel more unique and unpredictable, something I found to be a strength in the early games. These interesting personalities that they made for the supplies could easily be used for more realistic characters, and by realistic, I mean not realistic objects. That being said, I can't really criticize this entry in particular of how it was done, because the board limitations I mentioned earlier are directly related to the theme of the boss that you are currently fighting. A series first that I can't believe took this long to have was boss rematches, and I would have enjoyed this for sure for the originals, and I'm glad that they found a game to not only have this feature on, but they had it on a game with worthwhile bosses. It shows me that there was a confidence that they knew that they made good bosses and they wanted to brag about it, and I love that. More features is always a win, and it's clear to me that they know they've done a good job on this time. Unfortunately, I think the rematcher from the Mario and Luigi games were probably a little bit better, because they made those rematches more challenging than the original fights, whereas in the Origami King, they actually revert your stats to what they'd be around when you fought that boss in the actual game. And I think that's kind of lame because it's not really new content. A lot of times you would like a boss but want to revisit it and still feel challenged, and that's what Mario and Luigi did well with the boss rematchers. The secret Bowser X fight and Bowser's Inside Story was really cool for that reason. There was not really a secret boss in this game or anything, but at the very least, I applaud that they did this in the Origami King, and I think the timer feature was cool, so there was a new worth to playing them because time trials generally give infinite content to those seeking said content. There are some paper mache bosses called paper macho bosses, and honestly, while they aren't bad, I just don't like them much. Typically when I get an RPG, I want to play a RPG. I know it's technically not an RPG anymore, but it literally has turn-based content, so please stop pretending like it isn't one, honestly. On topic though, I think these bosses are pretty boring, with the Gooper Blooper being the exception. It reminded me of the Papercraft bosses in Paper Jam. I just found them to be a boring waste of time and pretty much just gimmicks. At least they never really lasted that long in the game though. I never died in a boss fight in this game, despite them being more challenging in this game than the last two. I did have a few close calls though, and since there were no prereqs for these fights, bosses don't have cheap deaths anymore, which I appreciate. Unfortunately, there are still a few cheap deaths in the overworld since Paper Mario, or the modern Paper Mario, seems to be obsessed with pretending that the game is challenging when in reality, those kind of deaths are just purely BS. When you see an awkwardly placed save block, make sure to use it, that's all I'm saying. There's one fight that has an instant death, but given the circumstances, it's acceptable, I think. You also have a 1-up mushroom to use throughout the game too, so if you were to die to it, you get another shot. One final note on boss fights, but turn motion controls off if you value the life of your controller. It felt terrible shaking my $70 Pro controller just to finish off boss fights. The motion controls were kind of cool throughout the game, but were completely ruined by the constant shaking of the controller that you're asked to do, especially in one very late game sequence. The 1000 fold arms were a puzzle solving mechanic that didn't actually need to be in the game, but I think it was better done than the paper eyes and cutouts in the last two games. I just wish that shaking stuff notoriously in boss fights was not as heavy as it was. I want to briefly talk about the sound direction in the game as well, because I think it has some things that's worth applauding. The main battle theme is multi-channel, which I think is a great choice. Each turn starts off with your ring doing like your spinning and sliding and stuff, and this is the puzzle section. And themes tend to be quieter during this section to emphasize the puzzle solving, yet they're still pretty catchy. For my Paper Mario traditionalist buddies who have yet to play this one, imagine the Lava Piranha battle music in the first half of these puzzles. When you transition to the action command section, no matter how lackluster the gameplay may be, you're treated with a giant crowd reaction, and the big whoa never got too bold for me, honestly. It was just one of those things that made this game what it was for me. And this crowd reaction transitioned into the second channel of whatever the battle theme was playing, and this is where the themes tended to go off, kind of like the second phase of the Lava Piranha fight. It's quite a satisfying effect. That's not the end of it though, because they do this for pretty much every fight in the game, and all the chapter bosses have their own special boss music as per Paper Mario tradition, but new to the series they do this for regular battle themes as well. And that's really cool because each new chapter, even sometimes sections of chapters, it introduces a new take on the main battle theme. And also in the end game, when things get serious, the game is also willing to ditch the battle theme and resume the dungeon theme continuously for dramatic effect. And it's a lot of effort overall to have so many variations of the same battle theme, and it reminds me a lot when Nintendo actually really seemed to care about the details. When you walk over glass in this game, there's a different sound effect, for instance. This isn't something I'd expect out of a Paper Mario game, but it's here now, and I'm here for it. Music also comes in and out of areas now in certain parts too, which I find to be really fitting in some areas. And while I thought initially the soundtrack was pretty bland and was going to be worse than Color Splashes, I'm glad to say that this was just another thing that improved after the first 5 hours. No, I don't think there's a ton of memorable boss themes in this game, honestly, but some of my highlights in the game include the Chapter 3 boss theme, the developmental boss theme, the final Chapter 2 area after you complete it, and a catchy track called Thrills at Night. The title theme is also pretty spectacular. In the early game, Toad Town is quiet, and by the time you're done with Chapter 5, the theme will have quietly built up into the title theme itself, and it was really cool to recognize a song you heard later, or heard before, later in the game. It reminds me in a sense of how Color Splash's world map built up in a really unique way as well. So, let's segue into the world map discussion. I think it's really good that Origami King ditched the world map. That being said, Color Splash actually did a lot of things with the world map that transitioned into this game that I feel needs to be credited. I think Sticker Star's world map was so insulting because each area was just secluded into its own area. But with Color Splash, content from previous chapters constantly overlap, and things that you do in levels constantly affect other levels or create new paths or shortcuts across the map. I actually liked it a lot, and wouldn't have been mad if they went this direction again. It's funny because Sticker Star's map felt like it was just a world map. So we all got upset and disliked bombing the Color Splash trailer because the world map showed us that the game looked to be Sticker Star 2. But the world map was actually used in a good way, which is kind of ironic. For instance, there's a train that you come across in Chapter 2 of that, in a Chapter 2 level of Color Splash. You don't really think much of it, but what you don't realize is that when Chapter 5 rolls around, you actually use the train to progress the storyline of that chapter. And each Sticker Star level felt like you just had one thing to do, and that was it. Actions you did in Color Splash levels followed over to other levels, and it's one of the only games I played where this is really a thing. And most of the levels may have a similar theme because they're in the same world, but rarely are they connected through actual plot and events. It's almost like they realized that the reception was bad and wanted to fix the game, because this was way more noticeable in the late game levels. The levels also allowed the game to throw out so many wacky one-time ideas that they didn't have to commit a full chapter to. Sometimes, the early unique levels was a fun rest stop used as the path that led to more story content later on. And at the end of the day, the world map felt like a world in Color Splash, so that's what's important. Oftentimes, there were multiple paths to get to levels from different areas, and many different exits for these levels. But enough about Color Splash, because what carried over from it to Origami King was the idea of having multiple routes to different levels across the world. And one thing that is like to get from the prologue to Chapter 3's place, you could visit Toad Town quite literally one time if you wanted to. This is because you walk from the prologue area to Toad Town, which has a path leading to the first chapter. You then take a lift from a place in Chapter 1 to the area of the second chapter, and to access Chapter 3 you ride down a river to get there. Now you have to do some other side quest that does take you back to Toad Town, but for the most part, you can get from the prologue area to the deepest parts of Chapter 3. And for Chapter 4, you must access a place in Toad Town to shove off, but from that point, you could hypothetically continue to the end of the game without ever returning. And I think the way the world is connected to each other is simply interesting and it feels believable in many ways. Of course, there's a fast travel point in every major area too, as well as a system of teleporter labs throughout the region at large as well. So it's never too big of an issue to get back to where you need to in a reasonable amount of time. What's good still is that fast travel doesn't get in the way of building a world. I really like how Luigi and Bowser are handled in this game. This sounds like a really weird comment, but after Bowser was pretty much just reserved as a final boss with very few lines, and Luigi was just kind of a hidden secret in the last two games, it's nice to have a game that just kind of memes on both the characters again. An element of the Thousand Year Door in Super Paper Mario that worked so nice was the Bowser humor. And yeah, he's the main antagonist of the Mario series, but there's always been a little bit more to him than just, oh yes, he is the evil bad guy. Paper Mario really highlighted that and turned him into a big goofball, I guess. And the fact that he's stuck in a ridiculous shape throughout the game kind of hits the mark in that sense. Luigi, on the other hand, goes on his own quest similar to like he did in the Thousand Year Door, and now he's just trying to help you. It's quite interesting because he goes off and does things on his own and occasionally bumps into you. And Luigi almost once a chapter makes everything harder for Mario. But this is fine, because it's a problem for Mario, not the player. It's a way of adding reason to explore some additional areas because Luigi got in the way. It's padding, but in the best possible way. Alright, so I've been talking about the Origami King for a decent amount of time now, and I have two more sections to get through. The first will be some thoughts and gripes with some of the remaining spoilerless content, and then I'll give you a warning that I'm about to talk about some of my spoiler stuff, or some of my favorite aspects. But anyway, I'll give a warning before the spoilers happen. Anyways, let's get to the penultimate section. One thing I actually liked was that before a boss, Olivia will ask you if you're going to save or not. Since the game is heavy on exploration, sometimes you'll walk a little bit too far, and I appreciate the game for having the self-awareness to tell you to save. It also makes it so I never have anxiety feeling like I forgot to save. I don't know if it's just me, but I've had moments, especially in the Pokemon games, where I just saved twice like an idiot because I wasn't certain I saved the first time. And this takes that feeling away completely, despite being such a little thing. One thing that may have people concerned is the excess of coins, but I don't think it's a problem as long as you try to play for 100%. Like I mentioned, I would encourage this playstyle. I ended with about 90,000 coins out of a possible 100k, I believe, so it's a nice pacing when you attempt to buy all available collectibles. Each chapter in this game is very long, and most have many parts to them. There's no true segments like Color Splash since the world is connected to itself, though. and I like it this way quite a bit, honestly. It reminds me of the direction of the older games, and the chapters are even longer than before. And honestly, in my ideal world, they would keep the chapter length around the same length as this game, but go back to having 8 chapters. Now, I know this would make the, I know this would make the game pretty long, but I think it'd be good if all the chapters were unique and great. I feel like this may be a little bit of spoilery to say that there's not 8 chapters, but considering the pipes in the museum clearly show how many sections there are, I don't really feel like it's a spoiler, so yeah. This game really shines in having very interesting chapter themes, and as a result it makes me want more just to see what other ideas they would come up with. Like, we could have had 2 additional sections perhaps, but I'll say more about the chapters later, but you should experience them for yourself first. I think it's cool that they added benches in this game. Not only does it remind me of Hollow Knight, one of my favorite games of all time, but I think that the ends were more of a pain than anything. Given that Mario in his home region, given that Mario's in his home region, it would be stupid to charge for healing because, he saves the world all the time. And given how many coins it would cost to make a noticeable impact, it would feel ridiculous to pay money to sleep in this game. It'd charge you 10,000 coins or something. But like I mentioned, there's not really a purpose of ever thinking about how to spend your coins most wisely in this game because the numbers are mostly irrelevant. Having benches is just the solution, I think. They're free and not out of the way, and one cool aspect of them is that the party gets to relax a little and give you some extra content, which actually incentivizes you to set on them to begin with. Alright, so there's a boat you can take out to sea in this game, and there's one section where you actually need to use it a decent amount. And apparently I didn't know this, but when you go back to the shore, they upgrade your boat for you, kind of like giving you the Swift Sail for those who played Wind Waker HD. The issue is, I had done everything I needed to do with the boat by the time I got this upgrade, so it just felt like wasted time. It seems I may have wasted a lot of time as a result, so I feel like they should have just given you the speed to begin with, but you know what, that's a minor gripe, so whatever. Just a quick warning, there's a hard lock in this game, I think that's what it's called. I hope it's been patched out by now, but there will be a point in Chapter 5 where you have to get 4 things to access a new area where you can go to a 5th version of the 4 things you got. When you use the 4 things to access a cave, you walk into the cave left to right. Do not leave this cave the way you came in. Your save file won't delete itself, but you'll pretty much lock yourself out of progressing. This isn't something I judge the game for because it's clearly a mistake, but it's just a warning. I think it affects very few people, but it's crazy considering how far into the game you are at this point to get hard locked. It would just suck, and may destroy your motivation to want to finish. There are a few times where the game babies you and forces you to progress the story instead of allowing you to explore. It's not ridiculous, but there was a point in the game where I was interacting with a character and he yelled at me because I thought I found a secret. It would have been unforgivable, but in true Paper Mario fashion, he told me there's no time for side quest, which was kind of funny. So, yeah. The whole game honestly felt a little slow at times. The run speed feels kind of slow, and perhaps the issue is that it's a pretty big game overall. The cutscenes felt slow also, and unlike many of the first 3 games, there's no real form of faster walk speed, or ways to speed the text up if you feel like you're a quick reader or have already seen it. The game at least has some self-awareness and gives you the option to skip cutscenes on performances, though, and namely if you've seen them before, so I appreciate that. There is a little bit of backtracking at times, especially in the post-game. It takes a whole minute to walk from Toad Town back to the Whispering Woods, for instance, though this may be a one-time thing for everybody. Yeah. There is one very large area in the game where they at least give you a vehicle to speed things up. The vehicle looks like a Goomba shoe, which is a nice reference to Mario 3. The town in this area has a parking lot that upon entry that you can completely ignore, but if you actually take the time to park the Goomba shoe, in the spot, the attendant nearby will actually compliment you and give you a coin, which is kind of a fun little touch. It's alright, before I get into spoilers, I'm going to do a quick compliment sandwich on stupid little things to close off the section. One good thing, I like the extra touch they add when hitting the save lock. You really bonk your head this time, it's kind of fun. The bad thing, please axe the fan thing, like the sticker, the card, axe it. I really thought we'd get a new Paper Mario game without that stupid giant fan appearing at one point. It's not that it was bad for this game, but it's just left such a bad taste in my mouth for so long that I just don't want to see it anymore. Finally, another good thing, I think that actually matters too. I love the coffee shop segments in this game. Clearly the devs really liked that moment you share with a shy guy in the train I mentioned earlier from Color Splash, and they took it a step further in this game with some of these coffee shop scenes. They're great for a quick break from the action. You start to look forward for these scenes as the game progresses. Was it something they needed to do? Absolutely not. Was it here anyway? Yeah. So, before I get into my at-large series retrospective, I want to talk about one more thing with Origami King, and then I'll tell you where to go to avoid spoilers. Possibly my favorite thing about Origami King is that, like every other entry in the series except for Sticker Star, the game has its own identity and personality. This becomes really apparent when you simply look at the box art, I think. Generic enemies aside, there's a lot of things here that are suggesting that the game will be different in many ways. The story may not be super deep or anything, but they at least set something up and surround this basis with an absolutely charming playthrough. Maybe you won't play it because you want to see the story unfold, but you just want to experience all the areas in the game. This is the same way I felt about Color Splash 2, but while Color Splash felt like it had a lot of fun and interesting levels, this one felt a little bit more solid because of the plot that it had to go with it. Anyways, I'm giving you a warning. I'm going to talk about spoilers, so if you haven't played the game yet, go do it and come back after you do, and skip to the time that you see right now on your screen. This is your last warning. The time on your screen. Go there if you want to escape all the spoilers and stuff, and just hear the retrospective and closing thoughts on the Origami King. Spoiler discussion starts now. So like I've mentioned before, I think Chapter 1 is pretty boring. It gives you a feel for the game, but it doesn't pick up really until the very end. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I think it's kind of bad. But I've talked about it already for the most part, with the battle system and everything, so let's get to the more fun stuff starting in Chapter 2. Along the way, I'm going to point out small details I really liked also, but feel like I should talk about that as the chapters go by to give some more context. I've mentioned that I'm heavily disappointed by the partners in many ways. The lack of control in battle legitimately bugs me, and I honestly think it sucks that they have said in an interview that they can't come up with more clever character designs anymore. I'll complain about it a bit more later, but I think it just sucks that the Bob-omb partner's name is Bob-omb. Like, it actually just sucks, and it's not excusable at all. I want to yell at the devs to literally use anything else, but nope, his name is Bob-omb. Now, Olivia starts calling him Bobby, and I was actually happy about this, because now when I start talking about Paper Mario and mention Bobby, everybody will know what I'm talking about, who I'm talking about, the character. The fact that all the modern game defenders call him Bobby only proves my point. Everyone refers to him this way, like, for a reason. I almost wonder if Nintendo was doing this to troll us. Like, the character is adamant that the name is Bob-omb when Olivia calls him Bobby, and he keeps correcting her. And maybe I'm looking at this too deeply, but one toad in Chapter 1 blatantly trolls you asking you if you were expecting a magical map, so I wouldn't put it past them to be trolling us by implying that maybe that they're saying the name is Bob-omb, yet we're calling them something else different anyway. Anyways, I got over it until he eventually tells a story about his friend, who is also named Bob-omb, and that I just wanted to scream at that point. Like, it feels like there's so much creativity in this game to call them out for being lazy, but that's what makes it frustrating. Like, they clearly have good ideas, but they still do this to us. Bobby, however, everything aside, is a great character. His shenanigans in Chapter 2 are legitimately funny. There's a moment where, in the most well-timed manner possible, Olivia actually suggests that Bobby may not just be clumsy, but is actively trying to get himself into trouble. And his shenanigans on the mountain are just hilarious. It's charming to have him around Chapter 2. There's a moment where you need him to help enter a dungeon with you standing on a different platform at the same time. And after he does it, he opts to not enter the dungeon because, like, he's like, wow, that was a lot of work just standing on that platform. It's just so his character, I guess. So, for a single chapter, there's a decent amount working in the favor of his character. Now, we all know what happens to start the third chapter. There isn't much to Bobby initially, and honestly there isn't overall, but he manages to really have a heartbreaking character arc that lasts around 45 minutes after you really start to get used to having him by your side. Anyways, we know that Bobby sacrifices himself to save Olivia by blowing up a rock. It was something that I was expecting to happen, honestly, but there was a part of me that didn't actually believe it was going to happen. After he blows up the rock, you kind of expect him to be back at any point, kind of like he was pulling your leg, but he doesn't come back for the rest of the game, ever. And for a Paper Mario game, this is actually pretty heavy stuff, and I was actually surprised that they did this. It actually almost brought me to tears too, I'll admit it. It hit. It hit. I was not expecting. And now I don't want to take away from the other characters in Paper Mario series history, but this did hit different, and obviously wasn't something that could ever happen in one of the traditional games since your party lasted forever. So it surprised me a lot, and seeing Mario's pure expression of panic as he realized what was happening was actually heartbreaking and made my heart sink. Like, you get some closure with Bobby's ghost a little bit after. Olivia deals with some pretty bad survivor skills, and understandably so. And one of the more powerful parts of the game is when Bobby's ghost mentions that his sacrifice would be entirely in vain if she gave up. And this was probably the moment in the game where you really started to appreciate the game for what it was, because it did dare to be different and broke a barrier that was once seen as impossible in a Mario game at all. One final touch that had me nearly tear up again is if you revisit Shogun Studios and take pictures of Olivia at that one place, you can see Bobby's ghost in the pictures with you. Really a nice small detail to imply he's still with you in spirit. And honestly, for a generic Bob-omb, they proved me wrong. They did a pretty good character here. I just wish that I just don't understand why they couldn't give like a better design. I understand he didn't have a fuse and that was an important detail and stuff, but like still, like at least a name next time, please. Like, he is a good character. It's so much potential, but like why not just go the whole way instead of just I don't know, just going half. Anyways, moving on, Chapter 3 was probably my favorite one overall, but of course it wasn't flawless. Backtracking became a bit of a concern in the chapter, but it never felt like a straight-up hassle. And this is the chapter where you travel by vehicle. You're joined by a Toad Professor, and this is honestly where the line of original characters really becomes blurred for me, because we've now had multiple Pirate Toads in the last 2 games and this Professor, and they're clearly different than other Toads, and I don't understand why they can't just ride with this concept like they've done before. I can't blame them entirely because there's simply a lot of Toads in this game, but if you've played the original, you'll know that not every single Toad has to be some wild design. It would just be nice to see a little bit more effort in this category. Anyways, the Professor Toad is fine, but when the chapter is over, he mentions he won't leave the area, and it's like, fair enough. I guess they didn't have to actually kill off Bobby, but if he wasn't, like, I don't know how he's not part of the entire game given his relationship with the party, so it's hard to say. The Toad feels less memorable as a result, but he is a bit more useful in battle. Not that this really matters to me, though. Chapter 3 shines, in my opinion, largely because of its setting. I was seriously starting to wonder around this point of the game if they were just copying Bug Fable's chapters, considering both Chapter 1 and 3 were grasslands and deserts, respectively, and Chapter 2's Autumn Mountain and Bug Fable's Golden Hills looked quite similar. But I think it's just a coincidence. The Origami King actually pulled off the rare feat of making a good desert level. Sniff City is awesome. It reminds me of what Shy Guy Bazaar from Mario Kart 7 could be if it was cool, and the whole place is beautiful and lively, and it really makes me want to spend as much time in this area as possible. It's actually probably my favorite residential area in the series to date. In the main desert, or in the main desert part of the level, I was actually curious to see where the Toads ran off as you save them. Because you have a vehicle, you can actually outspeed them in this place, and though it's expected, I can indeed confirm that the Toads will quite literally run the entire length of the desert and through one of the cave entrances before you lose track of them. Just cool that they actually cared to make realistic detail. Anyway, the dungeon for Chapter 3 is a completely wild ride. What seems like a pretty spooky temple turns into a dance party featuring the absolute banger known as Thrills at Night, and wow, it's hilarious. The scene before the hole punch emerges was hysterical. When you finally save all the Toads, Sniff City turns back into Shroom City, and night turns into day. Honestly, the place looks cooler at night, but it still seems pretty lively during the day, and what I found to be cool was to find a bunch of Toads and Sniffits chilling together in one town. In a previous Paper Mario game, the Toads were pretty helpless, and the Sniffits would generally terrorize them for fun, or the Shy Guys, but in here they all get along fine, and it's cool to see them just vibing together. It's around this point in the game where you realize that the whole dynamic of good and evil is different than your normal Mario game, and it really fits the theme of understanding that there's a greater enemy at large, something that gets explored much more later in the game. Chapter 4 is weird since there's no new partner, but it is kind of cool that you just get to go to sea to explore, and eventually you learn all about the origins of Olivia and King Ollie. I was kind of hoping the Origami Castle looked a bit more like the castle in the basement of Mushroom Island rather than being blue, but not everything can be a win, I guess. There are 4 dancing toads in this chapter, though they're a minor detail, and what I found that's insane is that they made the effort to animate 4 different dances with all of them, yet they couldn't put in the effort to make them all look slightly different, despite, being their own groups and stuff. Like, the example I think of is like, look at the Traveling Sisters of 3 and TTYD. They're like their own, they're their own thing. They're a pair of people, but they at least have different colors and stuff. But anyways, this chapter was an excellent nod to the Wind Waker overall, and the CE Tower was a nice conclusion as well. The first 4 dungeons up to this point were pretty interesting. Chapter 1 was repairing a building, Chapter 2 was attending a performance, Chapter 3 was the dance party, and Chapter 4 takes all the elementals up to this point and combines them together to end the chapter. It really leads you to expect something different for Chapter 5, since the developmental quest is seemingly over, and wow, it delivered by bringing probably the best penultimate chapter in the series to date. Chapter 5 was awesome, because for the first time in series history, the second to last chapter's events actually directly sets up the final chapter instead of just being its own thing, and it does this in a really good way. It doesn't sacrifice Chapter 5 from having its own unique area as well, but the story actually kind of all falls into place. Throughout the story, we never really checked in much on Bowser, so it's interesting to learn that exactly what him and his minions who escaped have been up to the majority of the game. Early into the chapter, you learn that Bowser's castle crash-landed into a sky paradise known as Shangri Spa. Now, this place was really unique because it's an idea that's kind of out there, being a spa paradise located in the sky and everything. But what makes it more amusing is simply how Bowser's remaining paper minions are used in this chapter. Your partner for this chapter is Kamek, which is a gigantic surprise when you realize that he was the character who was the greatest thorn in your side the last two games. In this game, he's only helpful, yet without sacrificing the character and who he really is. A great example of this is when he asks you to inspect the castle because he suspects that it's guarded by something, because he doesn't want to do anything potentially dangerous to himself. It's not that he wanted to kill Mario or anything, but wanted to gain information without putting himself at risk. It's totally Kamek. Overall, Kamek as a partner is really cool because it's such an unlikely pairing and you get to learn more about his character. What's great about this section is that it does something that the main series Mario games are not capable of doing. It takes a look into the perspective of your enemies and shows the humanity to them. Kind of like the train Shy Guy in Color Splash. It's something nice about these recent Paper Mario games. Clearly you have your differences between Bowser's army and yourself, but they're clearly not all that bad. This becomes really apparent when Kamek actually saves Olivia from unfolding in one of the spas. Olivia gets a little bit too comfortable with the relaxation part of the spas, and it's surprising in a sense that Kamek does this. But I guess the point is, when there's zero risk to himself, it shows that Kamek's actually capable of good deeds himself. Because the crashing castle destroyed a great portion of the spa, the Toads who work the spa pretty much have forced Bowser's minions into slave labor in order to pay off their debts of destroying the island, almost to an irresponsible degree on the ends of the Toads. Honestly, this creates a really funny dynamic where you get to see the different side to the minions. Often they complain that Bowser was nowhere near this strict with them, and it shows that maybe Bowser doesn't treat them so poorly after all. It's pretty funny, and I really appreciate the nice little touches in this chapter. There are Toads that bosses the minions around the main area here, and when you approach them, they just have the nicest, cutest little smile on their face, and the second you're out of range again, they start complaining and yelling at the minions again to work harder. Almost in a Disney employees are artificially forced to smile kind of way, even if it means hiding the reality of the scenario. For a lot of this chapter, you're tasked with restoring Bowser Jr. back to health by visiting all the spas in the area, and as you walk around, Kamek and the, broken Bowser Jr. constantly talk to each other as you walk around, and it explores a little bit of their relationship too. Like, for example, Jr. will ask you if you're rich whenever you pay large amounts of money on stuff, and Kamek will tell him it's not polite to ask, for example. Kind of he's like a mentor. He's the guy who's really raising Jr. in a lot of circumstances rather than Bowser himself, but it's kind of fun in that way. It's a lot of little things like that. Like, really the whole chapter brings the theme of even your paper enemies finding a economy enemy with you, and they pulled off the teaming up with an enemy idea really well. I could not believe the game show this time. Honestly, I knew that they were going to do it somehow, but it hit me out of left field this time. Like, it was really fun this time. I wondered throughout the game what the obsession with the song lyrics was, and now it really hit me in the bonus rounds. I'll admit it, I looked up the lyric just to confirm I was right before submitting, because I didn't want to redo anything. It was a fun surprise though, and all I can say is that Bowser's Castle finishing up the chapter. There weren't any low points in this chapter. I never noticed that the Scissors boss could fake you out on the one-hit kill move it has. Luckily for me, I guess, and even in the rematch, I didn't run into it ever. It was a really cool fight, but possible I would have been salty if I had to restart it because I got faked out, which I didn't. Anyways, time to comment on the final chapter, and I thought it was kind of a weak ending, honestly. But really, I don't care that much because it was fine enough and the game still felt worth experiencing at this point. So a weak ending, while disappointing, didn't bother me a lot, but also criticized was worth criticizing. The final dungeon was fine enough, and honestly, I'm glad it wasn't super long because I felt like it would have just been like running on at this point. At this point in the game, you kind of just want to see the ending, and it didn't feel like Origami Castle was really that interesting, I guess. The Sabler boss was a pretty fun penultimate boss that I wasn't actually expecting because I thought the scissors would be the last one. But it explains why Bowser was the way he was, and I thought it was kind of clever how effectively it felt like you were fighting a chain chomp. My favorite part of the final sequence is in the room outside the final boss fight. There's a bench, the last one in the game, that you have like your scene with, but it's a mandatory one. And you sit on the bench and heal, and Olivia expresses concern about putting everybody in danger again. And of all people, Bowser actually has a really nice speech to give encouragement. It was really unexpected for him to be well-spoken, I guess. And when a character is a meme for a lot of the series, it has an even larger impact when he has a moment like this where he talks about what truly gives him fear, which is parenting a high-energy kid. Again, it's another shred of humanity coming from Bowser's crew at a well-placed time. I hated the final boss, honestly. The bosses were pretty good in the game overall, and I feel like the biggest flaw with the battle system is that they could not find a way to one-up all the bosses before it. So as a result, the boss battle reaches heavily to find anything that could be considered memorable, and this is quite apparent. The first sequence, which is most similar to the fights throughout the game, is pretty much just fusing the elemental battles that you've already played together, and the second phase truly had me regretting using motion controls, I guess. And it feels almost a bit pointless, but it gets Bowser involved, so whatever, it goes with the plot. The final phase really tries hard to be epic, where you essentially just have to configure a giant ring that Olivia has for pretty much no reason other than it being convenient. Like seriously, think about it, Olivia could not create magic circles throughout the game, let alone a giant one. This is actually the only part of the game I died on, because if one thing goes wrong, it's kind of, well, in battles that is, but if one thing goes wrong, it's kind of tough to configure in time. I was really annoyed because I thought I'd have to restart the fight, but luckily it lets you retry, which is honestly a better perk in modern games. Wasted time bothers me personally, and it's not like this section is something that felt worth repeating. It was just something I wanted to end, and I really hated this phase, and honestly felt like the game was just trying to be over dramatic, and this is where I have to sit back and criticize most of the series. To me, a good final boss, an excellent working final boss, is one that presents a reasonable challenge. It's something that really puts all the skills you gained and learned together throughout the game to test. And a final boss that would have seemed impossible earlier in the game, and it really lets you feel like you've progressed in your journey, and quite often a close call or longer fight against a memorable foe will be what you remember. And now I'll admit that sometimes in Paper Mario games, even the traditional ones, they've tried too hard with the cutscenes before. This is very prevalent in the Thousand Year Door, for instance. Watching that intermission for the first time in TTYD is actually such an empowering and great moment, but it loses its luster if you die and you can't skip it, because it's long. One thing they haven't fixed still is simply trying too hard to be epic, but unlike the traditional games, the fights fall flat on their face on being, the fights aren't even good on top of it all, is what I'm trying to say. One of the worst aspects of moving from the traditional games in general is the weak final bosses. This is no exception, as it's more of a spectacle that doesn't actually test your battling ability, and Super's final boss sequence was pretty bad because it completely exposed the game's weak battle system to begin with, and no matter what they were going to do with that final boss, they were never going to make it epic, and they probably knew that. Sticker Star's final boss was a complete mess because it took everything that was wrong with boss fights in that game and multiplied it by 5. I never even tried to get past it without a guide. One thing I'm actually happy to say is that Color Splash had a pretty good final boss fight, which is kind of surprising. It actually tests you purely in battle, and though the battle system in that game is pretty weak overall, it doesn't require thing stickers, and it throws a new concept at you in the final phase that doesn't stray away too far from the battle mechanics to begin with. I appreciated it, but unfortunately outside of it, I think the series may be doomed to not have better boss fights, or final fights, than the traditional games, because it's pretty hard to give a good yet memorable test that feels satisfying to overcome. So when you do beat the final boss, the ending is just kind of meh. It becomes so predictable at that point what's going to happen. The second Ollie is finished, he just understands what he did wrong. I don't get it, for real. He just changes, and there's just absolutely no character development. Just minutes before, he was being completely racist against Toads, completely convinced that overtaking a paper world to portray it in his image was fine. But he just changes because, that's the easiest way to write it all. He then requests to know what the scribble on his body is. And what's crazy is that the Toad that originally started all this, started all of his rage, scribbled a kind message on him, and he didn't even bother to figure out what it meant. He just went mad, so in honesty, it just feels like the whole plot was kind of useless because he could have read it and he didn't. So, I appreciate the experience overall with the game, but this was a letdown. I wish there was a little bit better of a backstory, I don't even think that Ollie was like doomed to be like a bad villain, honestly. I think he was fine enough. This just kind of was stupid at the end. But again, though it's bad, in my opinion, it doesn't ruin the bulk of the game at all. Now, the only big original character I haven't really discussed an opinion on, I think, is Olivia at this point, and I think Olivia was a pretty good sidekick. She was likable, unlike Kirsty, and though not Huey level funny, charming enough to put a smile on your face occasionally. Like, she was solid, but at the end of the game, like, her wish was just not it. Like, the final wish, honestly, like, it was kind of insulting to the player, I feel. Like, the final wish is pretty much undo all the origami that Ollie created, which obviously includes herself. In the end, she sacrifices herself to make things right, just like Tippy, Kirsty, and Huey, so super predictable. The thing was, it didn't have to be this way this time, and I find it kind of insulting, because it's like, seriously now, you could have easily just wished for all the wrongdoing to be over, but this one is clearly done to be dramatic. Personally, I think as a player, I'd rather them end the story in the most logical way possible. So despite me liking Olivia, her sacrifice was not particularly admirable like Bobby's was, because that was actually necessary. It was just clearly done for the sake of having a dramatic ending, and I'm just not about it. Think about Color Splash's ending, for example. Huey contains all the black paint that was causing the problems of the story. Huey cannot let the black paint harm anyone ever again, so he must take it somewhere far away. It's not just him sacrificing himself, as he actually has a purpose to do what he has to do. And in the 100% ending, it's even implied that he falls back into the fountain full of pain again, and where he was supposed to be at the start. So it's weird to say, I guess, but it's another W for Color Splash as far as the ending goes. If you really think about this wish at all, like, as well, it almost defeats the point of going for 100% if you think about it. You spend the entire game unfolding all these toes just to save them, just for them to be unfolded anyways. I guess it's still the right thing to wish for, but at the end I can't help but feel it could have been done in a better way. So, this pretty much concludes my thoughts on Origami King. It should be pretty clear by now that I actually like the game a lot, but have some issues with it. And as far as it goes on my ranking of Paper Mario games, I don't know exactly where to put it yet. In many areas it's among the best in this series, but as an overall package, I think it could maybe go as high as 2nd and low as 5th. The jury is still out, but I think it's probably 4th. There are many ways I actually see Color Splash as the better experience, but I think if I were to replay them one after another, I'd probably recognize that while Color Splash may have some of the best high points, Origami King is the more solid experience just by virtue of having less annoyances overall. The point is, at the end of the day, I like both, think both could have been better, and I'm fine with the series direction, though it doesn't mean I wouldn't want something better if it were on the table. So, I want to take this time to talk about what would have made the experience better, and also address that cringeworthy interview that they did about the Paper Mario series before the launch of the game. Like I mentioned, I don't expect the game to be TTYD 2.0, but there are some aspects of TTYD where I just don't understand why this is so off the table for them. So, here's things I would almost certainly, here's things I think would just make a bet for a better game. I don't want to call them lazy for some of this stuff, but it almost feels like terrible excuses that they just don't want to explain in detail, because the more they explain, the worse they sound. So anyways, here's just my criticisms, and I want to point out some hypocrisy as well. I doubt anyone over at Intelligent Systems could ever find this video, but if they ever do, please hear me out here. I need to get a lot off my chest. So, to start, I want to discuss the mindset on making these games more casual, friendly, and accessible. They say that a reason they've taken away from the story elements from Paper Mario games is because they don't want to have complex or hard to understand stories in Mario games like this. They want Paper Mario to be as casual friendly as possible, a true entry-level RPG. Again, an entry-level RPG doesn't have to mean brain dead, it just means accessible. The thing is, the traditional games were perfect entry-level RPGs, easy to pick up yet still worth playing for veteran RPG fans. Now here's the thing, their claims are completely invalid regarding becoming more accessible, because the new Paper Mario games are way harder to see the ending without a guide than the older games in my opinion, and I don't think it's close. Seriously, does anybody who played Color Splash think that a 10-year-old child is going to figure out how to get past the steak boss? That was so cryptic. And with Sticker Star, almost every single puzzle piece or boss was like this. Multiple times throughout the game, you could place a completely logical sticker or card in a spot, and it would just have no effect. And with Color Splash, they at least offered hints in Port Prisma, but for Sticker Star, I have no defense whatsoever. Even in Origami King, there was one example I thought would stump a younger player for sure. In games this wordy, I think it's bound to happen, but one of the hints in the Chapter 3 desert is to dig where the eclipse occurs. Now, this is one of the first ones I figured out, honestly, because I remembered being able to see the moon spot at the lake, but I wouldn't expect a young player to know what they're supposed to do here. The only comparable thing would be like knowing what exactly watering hole means from TTYD, but Glitzville is a bit more reasonable to explore than the entire desert in Origami King, in my opinion. So, the point is, there's literally nothing that is barring kids from understanding how to play Paper Mario with the older system. It was a game I played and enjoyed at 10 and still enjoy now. I know some people have mentioned it being the first game they ever played. Again, there's nothing like unreasonable for it's not unreasonable to suggest that entry-level RPGs can be great experiences for veteran players and stuff. Matter of fact, Pokemon is like the largest media franchise I think there is out there, and its backbone is entry-level RPGs. The other big reason to not include a story to them was because of a Club Nintendo survey back with Super Paper Mario, and this really makes me upset. Like, the thing is, people do lots of evil things with modifying stats to fit an agenda, but in this circumstance, it is clear to me that they simply were trying fairly and honestly to use information from a poll that was quite literally inept at what it sets out to do. For their eyes, the Club Nintendo survey told them that nobody cared about the story, and I think this is straight up wrong. The reason why I am making such a claim is because I remember doing these Club Nintendo surveys, and for me, when I realized I could get free games on my Wii U by doing these, I hammered out so many of these surveys in one setting just to get as many coins as possible on the site. The demographic of people doing these surveys are not being completely honest with their intention to do these surveys. They're just trying to get coins so they can get free games. And I know this because I was one of these people. Now, I tried to be somewhat honest, but I was 100% rushing through all of these, and I assume a lot of other people were as well. Most of these surveys have questions like, what did you enjoy about this game? And the answer I chose for almost every question was the gameplay. Like, seriously, you play a game for good gameplay. That's why you would choose to play a game over watching a movie, reading a book, etc. It's just the easy no-brainer answer to most of these questions, and I'm certain in the SPM survey, the story is one of these options, and it got like no picks for the best aspect. I want to say really quickly that saying you play a game for gameplay doesn't mean you find a story uninteresting. I can say this as someone who probably took the survey at some point, and I don't remember such small details obviously, but I'm pretty sure they took good gameplay as the flip mechanic as well, because that was how they advertised this game's unique feature. Even if people selected the flip mechanic as the best feature without it just being considered gameplay, there was some bias ahead of time about what the devs thought was interesting about the game that I think may have carried over. I'll provide a link in the description because I don't want the video to be flagged or anything, but check out the SPM commercial for instance, and tell me that the flip feature wasn't something that they were trying to use hard to sell people on the game. It's simply the easiest answer when responding to the survey, from what I could tell. This poll result is obviously biased, probably unintentionally, but do you really think if they were to ask a question that straight up said, did you like the story, that less than 1% would say yeah, it was good? That kind of negativity is literally impossible with all the Nintendrones that exist. It's obvious that the story just got swallowed up by some gameplay features in the Club Nintendo interview, or the survey, and it's a shame that Intelligent Systems took this completely the wrong way. It feels like an excuse to just do something half-baked for Sticker Star, and it's really upsetting to me because they made some really special games that attracted many fans, and they just bailed on it to try to appease some new audience that they think didn't care about story at all. I'll reiterate, you can like more than just a few things about the game. Now, I'll admit, if you're looking for some deep story in a game, the original series probably still are not your games. Super Story had a fascinating ending, but it overall was not very deep, and that's okay, honestly. The important thing is, 1, there's enough plot to justify wanting to see it through to the end, and 2, each section of the game had its own unique little story that makes each segment memorable. And I think the reason why Sticker Star felt like such a sucker punch is outside of helping Wiggler out, there weren't really any sub-stories in the game at all. And you compare it to Thousand Year Door, where you uncover multiple mysteries, save a town from a curse, go voyaging for treasure with a large group, and there's just not much of a comparison. In Sticker Star, you're in the grasslands, then the desert, etc. Same cookie cutter, new Super Mario Bros. Stuff, over and over. This facet got better in the last 2 games for sure, but the point is, having stories makes certain parts of games, they make certain parts of games so much more memorable and easier to recommend to a friend or somebody. In the recent Origami King interview, they talked about how fans who just want to see the series as an RPG may be disappointed, and they hope people would keep an open mind about the game for what it is. Well, I've just given you an entire review and analysis on the good and bad of this game, so my question is, to the viewer, do you think I've been open-minded? Because I don't think I had any issues pointing out areas where the game was better than Thousand Year Door, and if anything, I'd like to think I've gained some credibility for that. But seriously now, maybe people would stop thinking of the series as an RPG if the best games in the series weren't RPGs, and maybe, on top of that, for the people who don't think that they're the best games in the series, maybe they would think it's not a RPG series if the more recent games in the series were all littered, like the whole series is littered with RPG elements. Like SPM had experience points and hit points, and the recent 3 just quite literally all had turn-based combat. It's pretty apparent that action-adventure is just a label they slap on the game to justify bad choices such as not having experience. And also a reminder, an RPG can still have good exploration. You can keep that pain hammer, confetti, secrets, etc. But come on, stop pretending like we're being unreasonable for seeing the series as an RPG. You literally have turn-based combat in 5 out of 6 games, and the one that doesn't have it still has experience points. Additionally, here's another challenge. In a more dated interview that wasn't too far back, the devs told us if we wanted to play a Mario RPG, we could go play Mario and Luigi. The truth is that that series will never fill the Paper Mario void. They're different series. But now, there's just no excuse anymore. As much as it pains me to see Alpha Dream go bankrupt, they made some of my favorite games of all time, there's quite literally nothing for Mario RPG fans now, even by Intelligent Systems' own logic. So, can we finally stop pretending like the classic PM games never happened? Like, please. Again, I don't expect them to make the Thousand Year Door 2. Like, the thing is, look at Mario and Luigi. The first 4 games in this series were all unique video games that did a lot of different things from each other. But they all still felt like Mario and Luigi games. They all built on one another. So Superstar Saga introduced a genius formula of assigning a character to a button. Partners in Time maybe doubled this and fit that for even more characters, including the baby characters, as well as having one of the most intense plots to a Mario game to date. Bowser's Inside Story gave us Bowser gameplay as well as the 2D segments, and Dream Team made the 2D segments have a new battle system and also gave us 3D rushdown attacks for both the bros and bosses. And each game was its own unique thing, its own unique theme, either through laughing in the original, sleep in the last one, and I guess the theme of being inside Bowser's body in the third one. I guess you could say the second one had the alien invasion plot. They're all completely different, yet build on each other so well. And it's what makes me sad to see the state that series is in now. They were all a blast to play, yet it didn't mean I wanted the loss of Paper Mario to come with it. Another new Paper Mario thing is to make a bunch of paper jokes. Look, I think it's fine to make jokes about the game being made on paper, but it literally doesn't matter. Like, as much of a broken record as I'll sound saying this, people liked the original Paper Mario because it was Mario's story. The aesthetic was just a nice, cool touch. And the second the idea of Paper Mario starts affecting gameplay in a meaningful way that makes the product worse, that makes for a problem. In Thousand Year Door, the paper plane curse and others were fine. They were just ways of saying, haha, he's paper, but it was just a minor feature that didn't actually impact the gameplay in a negative way. The line has clearly been crossed now to the point where it seems like they just have to make paper gimmicks, like the plot of the game, to make them function. And it was particularly egregious in Sticker Star, where they focused on stickers, scraps, and things being ordinary objects that turn you into stickers over actual world building, and the result was a game that was completely devoid of charm. Now, I've criticized the new games for not having experience points, but being honest, experience is not some hardcore mechanic that's really tough for casual players, but an RPG-like game seriously should have it. Now, the game is still functional without it, but progression and choice to do different setups are things that experience tends to lead to, and I do feel like the game is lacking when the only true upgrades are HP and more powerful versions of attacks being added. I saw some really interesting takes on the lack of experience points, and one of them was saying that Undertale was an RPG that didn't need experience points, and this has got to be one of the most ridiculous comparisons I've ever seen. Like, Undertale, first of all, does have experience points, but it's a story gimmick and gameplay mechanic that you can play without. And not having experience turns the game into something completely different and drastically changes the game up. Choosing to go without experience points doesn't decrease the amount of ways to play the game, it actually increases it. So just a quick note that I wanted to challenge because it's not comparable, and someone probably thought about it while I was discussing this. Thing is, experience points generally is good. Undertale is not a viable counter argument to that because it creates new gameplay because of it. The last thing I want to bring up is another part of the Origami King interview where they said creating new unique characters is no longer possible. And I know other people have said it, this is honestly a little disturbing, and it's like they're being ordered to make their games worse than they have to be. Like mentioned, I understand not every Toad has to be unique. There's a ton of them, I get it, but I think in Color Splash they could have solved a lot of this with the like in Color Splash they solved it with like the rescue squads and stuff, because a lot of these Toads didn't need to be different as they were in uniform. But Toads aren't really the only problem here. To me, it's more so that the game is heavily limiting itself in terms of enemy designs. Like Super may have gone off the deep end, but there were cool one-time enemies in that game, but I think once again TTYD got it about right. They had tons of normal Mario enemies in that game, but they didn't shy away from the creative stuff. Enemies like Clefs, Rough Puffs, Piders, Wizards, X-Nauts, etc. They created a nice dynamic with your typical Goomba, Koopa, etc. Koopas with sunglasses? Cool, why not? And I think this is an easy thing they still could have and should have done. You only have to design an enemy type once, unlike all the Toads in a town. I felt Origami King had a decent problem with enemy variety on top of all of this. Throughout the entire game, certain enemies from literally the first chapter would appear, like later in the game, and though they didn't manage to scrape by with the new classic Mario enemies, I just don't understand why they continue to limit themselves. Is it the end of the world? I guess not. Just why place limits on creativity? And, like, they could have had, like, different, like, races and stuff, and, like, different towns and stuff, different types of characters and stuff like they did. Like, I'm thinking of Twilight Town, for instance, new type of character and stuff. Thinking about the Desert Town in the original with all the, I forget what they're called, but the mouse-like creatures. I think that I just don't understand, like, why they insist on limiting themselves with like only Toads and stuff when there's just so much they could do to like really spice up the creativity. What possible benefit is there to limiting choices? Now, Mario Odyssey introduced a tons of new original ideas to the world, and why can't the game have characters like that? Like, can't they look different as well or have names? Like, a good example in TTYD is Don Pianta. They took a Pianta from the recently released Sunshine, gave him an orange appearance, a mafia boss look, and they gave him a name. Like, how tough is it to allow more characters like this? I just think that hindering imagination in favor of going with a more, quote, safe approach is such a horrible and complacent mindset, and I honestly think it's a little bit toxic. I don't know how to change their mind on this because I feel like the classic Super Mario fans have done just about everything they could have done at this point to make some noise about like how much they desire to see some aspects of the originals return. It feels like they're listening to us on some things. Like, there's no way the company is naive to all of this. Like, they asked us to keep an open mind. I think many of us have, but the whole mindset just feels like they're saying, screw you, we know what's best. We're going to make the game that we want to make and stuff. And at least recently, it's been fine games they're putting out, and like we still want to buy it, but this makes voting with your wallet really difficult, and it's frustrating because it could have been a fantastic game. It could have been a fantastic game, and it missed opportunities, in my opinion. I liked Origami King. There was never a world where I wasn't going to buy it, so maybe I am a corporate slave. But Paper Mario is meant, like, it means more to me than just liking the game, I guess. To many fans, it was a bigger deal than the main series Mario, and for me, it wasn't close. I just wish I could say they're truly taking all the best decisions like they used to, and there's enough promise in the new games that I know a new great one is truly possible. And I feel like they're definitely listening to stuff, like they've done stuff like Partners, etc. They decide to have the audience back, but it just feels like they're acknowledging it in like the most half-baked way possible, and it's kind of sad. Anyways, after all this Origami discussion, I want to end the video talking about the strengths and weaknesses about some of the other games to give more context and all my opinions on the series. I want to start off by mentioning that the Thousand Year Door has some other ways it can improve even more, even when it comes to the battle system. Now, I think that the battles in the Thousand Year Door are the best in the series, and I don't really think it's that close. Paper Mario 64 is number 2, and they made so many improvements on that in the sequel. But, like for instance, it fixed the annoying injured status for partners whenever they were hit in the original. But, with that, it technically created more problems, because partners having HP made it super hard for Mario to actually die at times, because you had plenty of partners who could absorb hits while Mario just chilled behind them. And now there comes a point in very late game in Pit of 100 Trials late, where the difficulty curve stops you from just abusing this and actually challenges you. But it's still a very real thing that you can cheese most of the game through hiding Mario behind partners. And now, there is one game that actually fixed this idea a lot, but it's not a Paper Mario game. It's Bug Fables. And Bug Fables really is the spiritual successor to TTYD at this point, and I plan to do a comparison with it soon, because I actually beat it like just a month or two ago, but I want to talk about the Paper Mario series on its own first. But one thing that Bug Fables does to fix this issue in the Thousand Year Door is that the main cast actually has no main character, and this means that all 3 characters must die to get a game over. The partner in front gets the most attack power, with the trade-off being that they get targeted the most. And it really adds strategy, and I'll be happy to explain that later in another video. But the point is that with all 3 characters having relatively low hit points throughout the game, you can't really just hide one with the goal of winning that way, because when the other 2 fall, you have a significant disadvantage now, and you can't just swap them out for another partner who has full HP. You need to keep all of them alive, so it's important to hit your blocks and stuff, and to strategize who you want to have in front on any given turn, and how I guess the badges are going to line up and change how you fight. Now, there are ways to improve the formula of TTYD, I think, and this would be something I'd love to see implemented in a new Paper Mario game, though it could be hard since Mario is always the main character in a sense. Maybe Luigi could join you as well as partners, for instance, and maybe Mario dying wouldn't be a game over. It seems like a perfect time to try to pay homage to Mario and Luigi, If you want to get like Bug Fables, you could still have traditional partners be a 3rd character. Now, I want to say there's not a lot to brush up on with the original game in the Paper Mario series because it's so similar to the Thousand Year Door, and to me they're both excellent games, and TTYD successfully built upon the original and improved in many aspects. Now, this is what a sequel should do in my opinion, so when I talk about the Thousand Year Door, in many ways I'm also talking about the original because they're so very similar. I also want to say, just a side opinion, Chapter 4 of the original is the best chapter in the game, and the best in TTYD is Chapter 3. But anyways, I want to point out some additional more game design I like with them. One really unique thing about these games is that they really did take full advantage of being entry-level games. And when you play a standard JRPG, damage dealt is often in the hundreds and thousands. With Paper Mario, all damage numbers were pretty low. And while it doesn't sound super exciting, it means that it's a unique RPG in the sense that everything you can do in them can be calculated with 100% accuracy. And this means that a lot of times, when playing battles in the first 2 games, you'll be planning out the equations in your head to finish off enemies exactly without wasting any extra resources. Now, finishing off enemies exactly is important, and by exactly I mean what I mean with exactly is you aren't like hitting them past 0 health, because often you can do more damage than what an enemy has remaining, and sometimes you'll need to use maximum power if you want to defeat an enemy, and you have to decide if the risk is worth it. Sometimes you use a weaker attack because you'll save the BP for your partner's turn, and despite having so many small numbers, it really creates a lot of strategy on how you want to handle each turn. Maybe you're fighting 2 fuzzies, for instance, and one has 1 HP left and the other is at a full 3. It appears you can only kill one this turn, but if you use 2 FP to multi-bounce, you could finish the one off and damage the other enough for Goombella to be able to handle it. Is it worth it? Well, that's for the player to decide. It really hit me that it's not completely simple when I watched one of my good friends from college play the Thousand Year Door for the first time 2 months ago. We both just graduated from university and he's a smart guy, but throughout early parts of his playthrough, there were multiple ways I noticed he wasn't optimizing his turn. I wouldn't tell him, of course, because you want everyone to have an authentic experience, and as the chapters progress, he learned how to handle certain situations more efficiently. A lot of times RPGs will have different types of thinking. In Bravely Default, you need to know when to stack your attacks together, when you have to defend, and it's up to you to know when you have to act heavily. In Paper Mario, the whole game comes down to optimizing your turns to do just enough damage and to save as many resources as possible, and it's something that really only can be unique when damage from certain attacks are completely fixed. It becomes much more interesting once you get all the badges involved in the mix too. This extends over to coin management as well. You're never going to have a ton of coins, so each purchase means a lot. Do you need an item or badge right now? Do I really want to invest 300 coins into this rat's desert expedition? Should I pay 7 coins to heal now? The next enemy could defeat me, but if I win, I should have enough star points to level up. And decisions like this are constantly made, and generally the weight of your actions actually matter in ways that it doesn't in some of the newer games. Though I didn't mention it earlier in my Origami King review, this is, in my opinion, another big shortcoming of the battle system. I didn't want to make the review too much about the Thousand Year Door, but I couldn't help but feel that not much thinking was required in some of the battles. Most attacks will one-shot enemies, and it's only a matter of building good lineups. There are so many coins in this game that each individual one is completely expendable. When you add time to your turn in that game, the coins flow so fast that you can't possibly keep track of how many you're spending. If you spend 210 coins, you get 21 extra seconds. If you spend 215 coins, it rounds down to 21 seconds. And you can't really control the exact amount. So it's really weird to think that this gives you the same effect, but if you're thinking about a decision in the Thousand Year Door, the 5 extra coins you spent without control for the same effect is the difference between being able to buy a mushroom and not getting one at all on TTYD. And you pretty much ballpark it in Origami King, and while that's honestly pretty ordinary for an RPG, it feels like another thing stripped away from the series that made the series kind of unique. So if the originals work so well, why would I want to consider playing the other Paper Mario games? Well, again, thinking something is worse doesn't mean it's not worth experiencing. Before the Origami King review, I said lots of positive things about the game that it also shared with Color Splash. So let's talk about Color Splash a little bit more. Now specifically, the story in this game is most definitely not good despite the dialogue being somewhat entertaining throughout the game. And I have to give this disclaimer after talking it up. I think the thing you have to consider before going into Color Splash is, if you're considering it, is to not really expect the plot to ever become anything worthwhile. The reason you should try out Color Splash though is because it has the best level variety in the entire series, and finding out what the game is going to throw at you next is really fun. Now, it's easy to feel that Color Splash has the best level variety because it actually took advantage of having a world map, so it didn't really have to commit to any idea super hard to begin with for the sake of maintaining the feel of a chapter. Though, I guess in the 4th and 5th chapters they did run with a theme for pretty much the entire time. But each location tends to feel pretty unique and almost unexpected. So while you know who the bosses are going to be the second you see the first Koopling, there's something cool frequently enough that'll keep you interested. The way the world opens up is also very unique. Quite literally, something in each area tends to open up certain events in other areas, and it gives the game the sense of being non-linear when, in reality, it's a little bit of a deception. Sometimes you have to call upon the Toad rescue squads to help progress the game. I don't know why, but I really like the idea of them in general, even though they definitely padded some hours. Unlocking the next level felt like a puzzle sometimes, but in a good way. The only thing to mention here is that if you go into Color Splash with an impatient feeling, you're probably going to hate it as a result. Sticker Star is a game that Color Splash was based off of, and you've probably noticed I've been very silent on it so far, or not really saying much about it other than it just being kind of trash. And this is because, in my opinion, there's just no redeeming qualities. Now, if you remember the trailer to Color Splash, the original one, it had a lot of negative outcry, and I completely understand why. And that trailer did Color Splash an incredible disservice because, while Color Splash is very much like Sticker Star, it improves in almost every single facet. The battle system is bad in both, but the puzzles involving thing stickers are significantly less cryptic in Color Splash than in Sticker Star, outside of the steak boss, that is. I know this is a spoiler, and we're not really spoiling things, I guess, right now. Well, but if you do decide to play Color Splash, actually just look up the guide with the steak boss. It's not worth it, honestly, otherwise. Battles in Color Splash at least give hammer scraps also, which increase your maximum amount of paint you can carry, and though it's really only useful in the early game, it does, you at least have some incentive to fight early on, and this is a problem with the entire game in Sticker Star. And of course, I think Sticker Star has like no charm in comparison. Sticker Star may have a desert level, a forest level. Color Splash may have a desert coliseum or forest circus, for instance. And of course, the dialogue in Sticker Star is completely dreadful. I see a lot of people when listing the positive aspects of every game in the series, they tend to give Sticker Star the benefit of the doubt with the music and say, oh man, the music's really good in Sticker Star. But to me, I think this is the lowest possible bar you could give the game. I think they're just trying to find something that they can give the game to act like every game in the series is like some kind of equal thing where every game has its own unique thing where it shines. But in reality, I think the whole soundtrack kind of shines in the music department for every game. And Sticker Star's no exception here. Matter of fact, it just managed to clear the bar in one area where there's one area where it's up to par. And even then, I personally think it's one of the weaker soundtracks out of like the entire series. So I'm sorry if I've offended any Sticker Star lovers. I just don't like your game. I actually replayed it earlier this year. I really tried. It's just not it, in my opinion. While Color Splash's battle system and gamepad controls are absolutely horrendous to suffer through, mainly due to a lack of experience, there are positives that make the experience worthwhile. In Sticker Star, it has all the same issues, but it has additional issues such as sticker sizes being like really annoying for your book, and just don't see any of the other redeeming factors. So the two good levels in Sticker Star, in my opinion, also that would be I think the Sniffer Whiffet level and the Enig Mansion. They're done better in Color Splash to begin with as well. Like you have the Cobalt Fortress or something, or the level before it, and then you also have the Dark Blue End. And I would say I can't recommend Sticker Star to anybody, and I just see it as objectively bad and a waste of time. And at best, it's an okay distraction from ordinary life, and in many ways, it reminds me of how boring and uninspired Generation 7 of Pokemon was when I think back on it. So, sorry, I have nothing nice to say about it. I do have to admit though that the formula, I was wrong about this, the formula can be done well. It was proven in Color Splash. Super Paper Mario is in a weird spot because when it came out, it was pretty controversial for changing the formula, and looking back, wow, we did not even know how much more the change was going to come. I feel like the good news of these new games is honestly that people finally started to appreciate Super for what it was, and honestly, I think Super Paper Mario is almost overrated at this point. To me, I felt like a lot of the story was overly dramatic and with a nice plot twist at the end. Many people see this as the definitive story for a Mario game. Personally, I think it's still outdone in mood, story, and feel by both Partners in Time and even The Thousand Year Door, but it's not by much. It was ambitious in its goal in this regard, and that's partly what I do love about it still. The big controversy with Super was that this game was the one that dared to get rid of turn-based combat, and my only statement on that is that it just wasn't a good decision for the game. It made jokes out of every single boss fight outside of the Underchomp for a special reason, and it felt like it was made worse for no reason whatsoever outside of experimenting. If anything, this is the game that Nintendo should have said we need to keep an open mind for. But when you play Super Paper Mario, you realize that it's very much a continuation of what the first two games set up, and even more substantial in the content department. In many ways, it was even a game that built upon and improved to The Thousand Year Door. It was just lacking in one absolutely crucial area. The collectibles are similar, the world is unique, and it has a new kind of hub world just like TTYD. There was a story, and chapters are set up somewhat similarly to the first two, and the catalog is there in the form of cards. You still have the recipes, mid-chapter segments, partners, and not just one, but effectively 3 pits of 100 trials. And now, I have some gripes about the partners because they weren't really interesting at all. Outside of Tippy, you meet them all, they give a stupid one-liner, and then they never speak again. The game also has a very obnoxious habit of taking its ridiculous jokes a little bit too seriously. Like, the game expects you to run in a cage for about 8 minutes in order to make enough money to pay off some guy to get a code to progress in Chapter 2. In Chapter 5, the game asks you to get out a pen and a paper to write down a password at one point that's like 25 blocks long. You hit a block pattern, and it's not joking. And this was also right after the game also told you to input on a keyboard the word please multiple times just to get the password. Now, one ridiculous joke that hit was talking it was like the classic joke from the original of what do you fear the most? It's I guess a running gag in the series from the original. And if you answer Francis, it actually teleports the meme-worthy Chapter 3 boss to a room in Chapter 8 for a refight if you choose to do so. And I definitely didn't see that one coming. It was a funny surprise. The thing with Super is that it changed the formula, but at its core, it still represented everything that the series stood up for to this point. The flip gimmick was fine. It didn't do anything to really make the game incredibly interesting, but it didn't hinder anything. It was just kind of there. The only thing I really think to take away with it was that it was a sign of change. And if you remember that Club Nintendo interview I talked about earlier, Nintendo supposedly thought that this random gimmick that affected almost nothing was why people enjoyed their game. Their flip advertisement worked in their minds, perhaps, and I think assuming anything but the gameplay and game fundamentals is what sells people on the game is a dangerous mindset that severely impacted the company for a while, especially in the era after this game came out. Now, if you've been listening up to this point, it's probably clear that I'm a huge fan of little touches that add to the charm of the game. Thousand Year Door, the Origami King, etc. is full of them, and it shows that the devs really do care. But the most important thing to get right on a game is making sure it plays well, and when it does, that's when the small things start becoming bonus points. Unfortunately, I feel after the time Super Paper Mario launched, there was a mentality shift that may be even like part of the reason why the series refuses to use the non-standard Mario characters anymore. The issue, in my opinion, with a lot of newer Nintendo titles is that they try so hard to one-up the last entry with some stupid gimmick. You could see this not only with games, but with their consoles. And here's the thing, I'm all for innovation. That is, if it's done well. And sometimes you'll get a really good idea and it's revolutionary. But sometimes gameplay improvements is fine on its own end and you don't have to have some revolutionary idea just to turn a profit. Now, I know I've brought up Pokemon a lot, but look at Pokemon Generation 4. The biggest change from Gen 3 was the physical special move split, and I don't think many people really see that as the defining feature of Gen 4, but it was a change that improved the gameplay of every title in the series afterward, and significantly at that. And Generation 5 also didn't have any gigantic noticeable changes to it, and that was fine. The game just focused on bringing the definitive Pokemon experience, and I think it did a good job of that personally. It felt like one of the most complete games in the series, and it looked much better than Gen 4, while upping the efficiency and speed of the battles and text, and added many small improvements such as ability bars, adding new low HP music, or even triple battles. Now, in Gen 6, they struck gold with Mega Evolution. Now, I thought Gen 6 was kind of boring personally, but if there's one thing to compliment it on, it was that it successfully added a really cool ability in Mega Evolution that worked very well. The thing about this though, is that Mega Evolution was a very in-your-face kind of mechanic, and as a result, they've tried forcing new ideas that people see as kind of stupid in every following generation, leading up to even the current one. Like, just to one-up Mega Evolution. Now, they did this with Z-Moves in Gen 7, and now there's Dynamaxing, Gigantamaxing, etc. in Gen 8. And at the end of the day, they keep adding all this new stuff, and if you were to combine it all together, it's just a mess and doesn't complement itself at all. Now, I'm fine for gigantic changes like Mega Evolution, but that's when it's well timed. The problem is that Nintendo in general seems to fish for gimmicks, and when one hits, they suddenly think that's all that they can possibly go for. Back on the GameCube. Above everything else, they focused on having amazing first-party games that sold us on their products for life. And the Thousand Year Door was a lot like the 64 game, but instead of stripping it of all of its defining traits, it made changes to gameplay to improve it. It was the perfect GameCube game if you really think about it. This included adding a lot of the stuff, partner HP and stuff, the crowd improved the SP system, and to top it all off, a completely new setting outside of Toad Town gave the game a full new vibe. And at its core, it was still similar to the original, just improved in almost every possible way. And they did this a lot with games back then. Then the Wii came around, and they struck gold with motion controls at the right time. Sounds a lot like the Mega Evolution thing. The company had a personality shift as a result to cater towards a new casual audience that they suddenly had, and around this period of time, all of their first-party games started to turn into simple, casual-friendly 2B platformers or Wii Music or Wii Sports Resort or Wii Fit or whatever Wii game that you can possibly come up with. And it ended up in often criticized games such as Skyward Sword or Metroid Other M. The exception is Xenoblade Chronicles, but all the long-time Wii classics that we remember today really came out near the beginning of the Wii era, if you really think about it. With, I guess, Mario Galaxy 2 being the exception, but that was just because it was bonus levels from the first one that became an entire game. The mindset of pandering to a casual audience was incredibly dangerous in my opinion for them, because not only was it a little insulting to many of their best friends, but the casual player tends to be more aloof when it comes to the world of video games. But they committed to them, and as their attempt to one-up the Wii, they came out with a Wii U and a stupid Fisher-Price controller. Now, the console sold like trash because they started to farm gimmicks before focusing on bringing out a good library first. The console was dead for the first 2 years it was on shelves until Mario Kart 8 came out. But by then, it was too late to save it. And it's obvious why the Switch sold so well, and it's because the console's gimmick of being a handheld is actually useful. It's a good one. For the Wii U, including Color Splash, it felt like most games were honestly better without the gamepad, but they forced the gamepad on people to justify its conclusions. But anyways, that's the end of my rant on that. Around 2012, the year that Sticker Star came out, Nintendo was fully engrossed in this idea that every game has to have some kind of selling point or gimmick. And this is when Paper Mario fully changed. It became more about paper than it did become about Paper Mario, and now I'm well aware that this is a trigger statement for many modern Paper Mario fans, but I want to say again, that being different can be bad if it's worse than what it's being compared to perhaps, but it's unfair to assume that something is bad just because it changed. What is frustrating with Paper Mario now is there are very real explanations as to why the originals felt more alive. The Thousand Year Door was named the way it was because of the story behind the game. Now this is pretty typical, but if you took away the Thousand Year Door from the gameplay is still going to be like Paper Mario in the 64. Now with Sticker Star, the game turned into something completely different. The entire game was built around finding consumable sticker attacks, and to say it completely took over the game was an understatement. I've already explained my thoughts on Sticker Star and have let this video go on for a tad too long at this point, so I'll spare you more details. But the content of the game is questionable, and looking back, it does make sense. This was the direction that Nintendo thought would sell then, and unfortunately, it was at the expense of the content that made the Paper Mario fans fall in love with. And it was a flop to the eyes of many, and completely decimated the trust of the traditional fans. So it makes sense why Color Splash was so hated at first, but now that we have a new generation of players who have grown up playing the recent two games that are pretty good games in their own right, I think it's only understandable that there are defenders of games that seem good in that there's defenders of those games because they're pretty good in their own right. I just think there's a lot of context that many of these players are missing. I do hope they try out the older games when it becomes convenient if they haven't already. Unfortunately, because lots of older Paper Mario fans trash the newer games and have reason to do so, there's a lot of counter hate, and I think it's mostly unfair. Now, I've seen lots of people trashing some of my favorite games of all time now just to prop up these newer games, and it honestly hurts to read. I get why they do it too, because to them, people are attacking games they like what's happening with us. But for me, I feel like I like both sides, outside of Sticker Star really. But it is clear to me that one is better than the other, and that's not to discredit the new games at all. I think I've talked them up a lot personally. I don't really think that this is me biasing what I grew up with either, because I grew up playing Mario Kart Wii and Smash Melee, yet the multiplayer games of choice that I have are 8 Deluxe and Ultimate. Now, some people have called TTYD a walking sim. To me, I see multiple messages saying that the backtracking ruins the game entirely, and I honestly cannot believe that people actually play the games and just sit down and think this. I think The Thousand Year Door is so well made that people are really just grasping at straws, completely exaggerating a problem of the game to bring it down. And these same people completely downplay the flaws of the newer games. To me, it's really just telling about where the series is right now, and I think everyone just needs to do a better job of accepting the new games for what they really are, because they are worthwhile, and for many of us, a return to form or even a TTYD remaster would be a dream come true. I think it's possible, but it's crucial to not bring down these new games in the process also. To me, I think Sticker Star had it coming for being a legitimately bad game, but I feel like the people who hate on the recent two ones at this point probably to look at the newer fans like how the TTYD haters look to me. So, thing is, I don't want to deny that Paper Mario Thousand Year Door has backtracking. At the beginning of Chapter 7, it is a little bit ridiculous. But people are acting like it's like hours upon hours of the gameplay. It's like, no, it really isn't. Now, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not unreasonable to want to see a return to form. I feel like it would be a big win for everybody, because, I think a lot of the new players just will always play the new games. I think the old ones would see it as a welcome gift back. But, I think what is important to notice for older fans alike is that they should actually consider some of the better aspects of the new games. Now, I still think that the whole fan base needs to do a much better job respecting each other's opinions, and who knows where we go in the future. Now, if we continue to respect the new games and respectfully ask for a TTYD remaster, maybe that could be the start of something special. Maybe it comes out, it has overwhelming success, sells more than the original. You never know. I think being respectful may be the key, though, because I think Intelligent Systems has people to make the best game to date in the series, but right now they may have their own conflict with us, as weird as it sounds, so maybe we should try to be encouraging. Anyways, this is about all I have. It wasn't, I guess, incredibly organized, but it's pretty much my detailed thoughts on where the series is right now, because I've never really shared my thoughts in depth with it. But given the timing in the new game and the state of the fan base, I felt like it's the best time to try, if anything. So, feel free to discuss anything I brought up, and thanks for watching, of course. But if there's one takeaway you can, I guess, get from this video is, I think I've already made it very clear my opinions on the series. I think just be respectful with everybody. Maybe Intelligent Systems would be encouraged if we were more polite, perhaps. I don't know. We'll just have to see where it goes. But at the very least, I can say at least the recent game is good. Maybe, even if maybe not exactly what we wanted. You know what? I guess that's worse than it being terrible still. So, you know what? Let's hope for the next game to be as good as, even TTYD. Hopefully it's better, but I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, but all we can do is just hope. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.